On Saturday, before the game against the Cincinnati Reds, the Mets are going to retire the number of David Wright. David Wright played his entire Major League Baseball career with the Mets, never played for another organization. The Mets were fortunate enough to have David Wright as their third baseman for 14 seasons from 2004 to 2018. He missed one full year to injury in 2017, but David Wright, one of the all-time greatest Mets to ever play the game. David Wright, personally, is my favorite Met of all time. Among his accolades, 14 big league seasons all with the Mets, lifetime 296 average, 242 home runs, 970 runs batted in, a seven-time All-Star in 2006, 7, 8, 9, and 10, again in 2012 and 2013. Won a Gold Glove in 2007 and 2008, and also in the same season that he won each of those Gold Gloves, he won the Silver Slugger Award. Major League debut, July 21st, 2004. Last Major League appearance, September 29th, 2018. A member of the 30-30 Club. David Wright also holds the distinction of being one of only four captains in the Mets team history. Of course, the other three, being John Franco, Gary Carter, and Keith Hernandez. He will join on Saturday Tom Seaver, Jerry Koosman, Darryl Strawberry, Dwight Gooden, Keith Hernandez, Mike Piazza, Gil Hodges, and Casey Stengel as Mets who have had their number retired. Nobody will be able to wear the number 5 for the Mets organization ever again. Of course, how did the Mets find David Wright? When the Mets traded away Mike Hampton, when Mike Hampton went to the Colorado Rockies in 2001, the Mets received a conditional draft pick for his departure. They used that conditional draft pick to get David Wright. So, David Wright, if injuries did not rob him of greatness, David Wright arguably could have had a longer career, more than 14 years. And who knows, maybe he could have been. He won't get into Cooperstown because, you know, he just doesn't have the numbers to do it. But as far as all-time Mets greats, can't say anything more. David Wright, I'll never forget. I was at Game 3 of the 2015 World Series. The Mets ultimately lost that series 4-1 to the Kansas City Royals. But David Wright, in the one game that they won, hit a towering home run. I'll never forget it. I was in section 537. And for anybody who has been in Citi Field, 537. And actually, it's ironic that game was the last time I ever sat in the 500s. But it's the World Series. Who's not going to go to the World Series? But I'll never forget that home run. David Wright was, and I'm sorry to talk about the man like he's deceased. He's still alive. David Wright was the right guy, pardon the pun or the play on words, that you'd want to have as the face of your organization. David Wright was a professional, always took accountability, solid leadership, never afraid to speak to the media. And you look at the times that David Wright was on this team, 2004 to 2018, In that time frame, the Mets only made the postseason 3 times in his time as a player: 2006, 2015, and 2016. David Wright, his teams didn't see the postseason anywhere near regularly, and he took that scrutiny that came with being the best player on a bad team for in a bad organization for a long time. Never badmouthed the organization, never went out in the public and did anything that would make people look at him funny, never embarrassed the organization. Granted, during the Wilpon era, when the Wilpons owned the team, they embarrassed themselves quite enough. But David Wright never, never, never had any off-field incidents. He was a guy by all accounts. Players in the clubhouse enjoyed. Jose Reyes has always spoken very highly of David Wright, and amongst others. There were plenty of times, especially when Citi Field first opened, I took trips to go watch Mets games before I became a season ticket holder, and David Wright would walk up there to either one of two walk-up songs: "I Got Five on It" by the Loonies or "The Right Stuff" by the New Kids on the Block. And you know David Wright, one of the all-time Met greats, classy guy. Who can't forget his heroics in the World Baseball Classic, where he earned the nickname Captain America. So much so that Marvel signed off on a Funko Pop with David Wright wearing a Mets hat, dressed in the Captain America uniform with the shield. I can't forget the 2013 World Baseball Classic, where he hit that grand slam against Italy. Five RBIs against Puerto Rico later on in the tournament in 2013. Led the tournament in RBIs. And it's a shame he sat out against the Dominican Republic. But David Wright in 2013, he made the All-World Baseball Classic team. He was the only American on that team. Even in 2009, that World Baseball Classic against Puerto Rico, David Wright with a walk-off hit. The guy had a lot of clutch moments. And again, you for an organization, now I'm not saying the Mets are the Yankees or, any, say what you want about the Yankees and their prestige, but, David Wright, only the fourth captain in the history of the team. And look who he's in the company with when you talk about Mets captains. Gary Carter is a Hall of Famer, although he's wearing a Montreal Expos hat on his plaque. Keith Hernandez, one of the all-time great defensive first basemen there ever was. Shame he's not in the Hall, former MVP. And John Franco, who for a long time was the Mets closer. And David Wright, he went out there every game, played his heart out, left it all on the field, gave his best effort, 110% every time. He loved the fan base, and the fan base, we loved him back just as much as he loved us. And out of all the players in Mets history who have yet to have their number retired, I can't think of a better player to have his number retired than David Wright. I've been watching Mets baseball since about 1996. And even though Mike Piazza was big when I was a kid, as far as superstars in baseball, and I'm a huge Mike Piazza guy, don't get me wrong. But no Met in the history of Mets had a polarizing effect on me than David Wright. And I would assume I'm not just speaking for myself when I say that. You know, baseball goes in generations. For the kids of the 90s, and I am a 90s kid, but for the kids of the 90s, Mike Piazza, if you were a kid that was a Mets fan, Mike Piazza was our hero. Mike Piazza was on his way out. He only played a season and a half with David Wright, but when David Wright came up, that generation of kids who became Mets fans, David Wright was their guy. Just like Tom Seaver was their guy when there were kids in the 60s getting into baseball and they decided to be Mets fans. Just like Darryl Strawberry and Dwight Gooden were their guys, and Carter and Hernandez were their guys when those 80s kids decided to get into baseball and be Mets fans. David Wright, generational talent. It's a shame that his body started to betray him later on, but there's nobody left that's more deserving right now than David Wright, and I'm going to attend his number retirement ceremony Saturday. We'll have the footage uploaded here on the channel from the ceremony, and yeah, I'm really happy to see the Cap getting his due, getting his respect, getting his flowers. Going to be inducted into the Mets Hall of Fame and getting his number retired. So thank you for the memories, Cap, and I can't wait to see you in Citi Field on Saturday. I tip my hat to you.